We are at war.
Absolutely,
Where is the
Sanket.
action at war footing? Budget is always an account of where money will spend what. And
Kirtivartan Singh says, the Honourable Minister, that no one actually dies or no one gets affected because of pollution. We are a poor country and therefore in our priority, roti, kapda, makan is more important and hawa can go for a toss.
the government can always turn around and say that you cannot look at our pollution spend only from the point of view of the budget allotted to pollution control.
In Delhi, of course, we are not allowed to measure it because, we sprinkle water on the air quality monitors.
We've been made to believe that's business as usual or air as usual, and therefore there's no concern at all on the ground. The poorest of the poor are not part of it, and therefore that the votary of the country is not still interested to really take this up as the biggest thing.
We understand that priorities change. So right now the government's priority seems to boost defense expenditure. But for something which kills 17 lakh plus Indians every year, is 1091 crores enough? Hello and welcome. My name is Sanket. You're watching me on TheFederal. The show is called AI with Sanket. This is the AI of news because news in India today requires not artificial but analytical intelligence. Now, analytically speaking, this budget, whenever people comment on the budget, they say either half of them would want to conclude that this is a bad budget, anti-people budget. The other half will say this is a masterstroke budget, huge reform budget. But the point is, all budgets almost always are a mixed bag. And so is this one. But there is one front where you cannot argue that this budget has failed, and that is in tackling pollution. You look at the budget allocation to handle a crisis as severe as pollution, a crisis for which Geeta Gopinath earlier this month said in Davos that it is having a far greater impact on Indian economy than any trade deal. She quoted a Lancet report which said pollution is killing 17 lakh plus people a year, much more than COVID did. And this is happening every year. And for something which is killing 17 lakh plus Indians, the budget allocation to tackle that problem is only 1091 crores. Clearly, on the part of the government, they have certain other subheadings in which some allocation has been made. But all of this is a subject matter of discussion. Juxtapose this with the defense budget and you will see a massive boost over there. I understand defense is a priority because we have to be prepared for war on our frontiers. But the war against pollution is also a war. And are we fighting it at war footing? I'm afraid not. Let's put this to a discussion. Joining us right now is Mr. Vimlendu Jha. He's an environmentalist. We've spoken in the past as well. It seems as if pollution is not an issue of pressing emergency, whether for the people of this country or for the government. This despite the fact that just a few days ago we got you a program where Geeta Gopinath very categorically mentioned that forget tariff. The real debate is this. This is what is going to impact the economy most. Vimlendu, do you feel that the fact that the budget has completely skipped or in fact even reduced allocation despite the warning is a cause of serious and grave concern? Because the latest estimates show that in the 2025-26 budget estimate, the allotment is 209 crore rupees lower than the revised estimate of 1300 crores last year. The estimate this time around is 1091 crores. In any case, this is too little.
Absolutely, Sanket. So, all this while we've been talking about lack of political will, and the only parameter to understand the government's will to really address a crisis like air pollution, the only indicator actually is allocation of resources. Of course, because at the end of the day, if the government says that it wants to do something or wants to pretend that it wants to do something, it will have to really show us the money in terms of the budgetary allocations and also in terms of governance structure. Clearly, what we're seeing here, and there are two parts of this conversation. One is that we've seen very little resource being allocated year after year, despite a lot of shame and loss of perception that India and also the government of India, both in that sense, country being very, very polluted and government of India in terms of really not doing enough, has been highlighted everywhere globally. As in terms, I'm not even talking about national news, I'm talking about international news to international fora, including World Economic Forum. And despite that, despite all the data coming to the fore with regard to the impact of pollution on human life, in terms of more than 17 lakh people dying, the impact of life on life expectancy in terms of losing 8 to 10 years if you live in North India, especially if you live in Delhi NCR, the impact on economy in terms of the World Bank report, be it, or the Lancet report, what Geeta Gopinath actually highlighted, that we're almost losing 30 lakh crores each year. And therefore, we thought that perhaps in the wake of these new revelations, although these are not new revelations at all, as in the story has been story of pollution or story of inaction on pollution has been on for more than a decade and a half at least, if not longer. Perhaps it could be longer than that in many ways, looking at when MC Mehta started talking about air pollution in that sense and the Supreme Court intervened. But so little, we're talking about 1,000 crores odd. And by the way, as I said, two parts. One is that you actually allocate very little, which is 1,000 crores for almost 80 cities or 100 cities in that sense, which in a way, if you really break that, it comes to around whatever 10 crores a city in that sense. And if you look at the other part of this is in terms of the spend of this money. If you look at 25, there was only 16 crores actually spent out of the 900 crores that were actually allocated in that sense. So it clearly shows that this is not important, again, from the government, and maybe perhaps that the government is brazen about this, perhaps also is because there's no ground up demand, as in people treat 300 to 400, or we've been made to believe that's business as usual or air as usual, and therefore there's no concern at all on the ground. It's been normalized largely, as you were earlier saying, that at most it ends up becoming a drawing room conversation of the elite, of the middle class. The poorest of the poor are not part of it, and therefore that the votary of the country is not still interested, inclined, or putting pressure on the government to really take this up as the biggest thing or the next to the biggest thing, and therefore reflecting in the budget in that sense. So very, very unfortunate. Reality is that it's not just a drawing room conversation. There's enough evidence for us and for our Janata to know that the poor actually get disproportionately affected. Poor get more affected by pollution than the rich. But indeed, the management of perception, the management of narrative, and everything else. We are a poor country, and therefore, in our priority, roti, kapda, makan is more important, and hawa can go for a toss.
Now, the number of deaths that the Lancet report spoke about due to pollution, which Geeta Gopinath also quoted, is alarming. And we've done a program on all of this. But Vimlendu, the point over here is this. The government can always turn around and say that you cannot look at our pollution spend only from the point of view of the budget allotted to pollution control. Look at the amount we have allocated for boosting transport and the EV sector. Look at the amount we have spent on solar and clean energy. Look at the amount we are spending on regulators. However, even that is a very modest gain, 123 crores, which is up from 116 crores in the revised estimate of 2025-26. CAQM allocation is 35 crores. Green India Mission allocation is up by 95.7 crores. So the government can always turn around and say that look at our pollution spending across all sectors and not just pollution control. How would you respond to this? And what categorizes as exercise in pollution control?
So Sanket, there are two parts to this question as well. My answer will be in two parts. Part one is that at the end of the day, indicator of whether so-called spend or inclination or intent or government action is working on the ground. The only indicator of that is the lungs of our children, or in many, many ways, the pollution monitors that we have. Reality is that if our air quality monitors are still, crossing the top mark of 500 in the public ones, and the private ones are actually reading more than 800 or 1,000 on most odd days, and even days it's slightly better in the sense that almost 200 days is where the air is terrible. Therefore, that's certificate enough, or the report card enough, that we are not doing enough in that sense. Therefore that it should rest that nahi hum काफी नहीं कर रहे. Second part is that in terms of resources, that at the end of the day, why are we so hell-bent on really counting this 1,000 crores? Because this is the pollution budget. By the way, this is not clean air budget. This is the pollution management budget, and many other things are also there. So National Clean Air Program is under this 1,000 crores that we're talking about, and we still don't know how much of that 1,000 crores or 1,091 crores actually will be for clean air in that sense. Indeed, transport sector, which last year, road and transport and all of that had lakhs and lakhs crores allocated for it, and there is of course the solar mission and so on and so forth that's allocated. All of that together perhaps might bring in some incremental increase in large infrastructure, which directly or indirectly influences or affects pollution. So of course, when you do more EV, then of course the pollution levels will go down. And if you're saying that mobility sector is the main contributor, almost 40% of pollution actually comes from the mobility sector, and therefore any form of investment in EV will actually gradually and systemically will change that in that sense. But if that was so, then why is the government not putting all of that together as a centralized budget, which is clearly focused on clean air? At the end of the day, the measures that we're actually talking about in terms of four-stage measure, as in if I have to simplify it for our audience, we're saying that we need to really invest in public transport. Why shouldn't there be a clear category of public transport upgradation, at least in Delhi NCR region, and therefore X amount of resources allocated for that? We're saying EV, but EV perhaps does not mean public transport specifically, and we still do not have a roadmap in terms of whether that will be in Gurgaon and Noida and Faridabad and Bahadurgarh and Sonipat as well, or it is just focused on Delhi area, because the scientific approach to airshed is extremely important. Similarly, the coal thermal power plants, if we say that 7 to 10% of pollution actually comes from the sulfur dioxide emissions that come from these coal thermal power plants that operate in the immediate periphery, then we need to really have those budgetary allocations in terms of those FGDs. We don't see those. At the end of the day, of course, to justify, we can say every amount of money that is actually being spent on the government is for the welfare. So indeed, the budget allocation, every penny is for welfare of the people. But then you have to categorize and prioritize welfare depending on the need of the hour, need of the day, or need of the year in that sense. And when you have 18% people, 18% deaths in our country, if is attributed to direct impact of air pollution by not just by so-called foreign think tanks like Lancet and University of Chicago, but also ICMR and other bodies which are under Ministry of Health. And the unfortunate part is, as when you look at this departure or this silence of the government, comes from the fact that Kirti Vardhan Singh says, the Honorable Minister, that no one actually dies or no one gets affected because of pollution in our country. He actually said this in December and once again last week in that sense. So it's not just about counting the money. We are looking at dealing with the biggest public health crisis, the largest economic crisis of our country in that sense. As I always say, cost of action, and at the end of the day, cost of inaction is higher than cost of action in that sense. The fact that when we are not doing enough, we are losing so much money, to do would be cheaper. So, and then when we compare it with Beijing, imagine 15,000 crores each year for 10 years for a city versus 1,000 crores for the entire country is what we are allocating in the name of pollution.
We also have Mitali Nikore, founder of Nikore Associates. Thank you to the two of you for joining us. Mitali, I would like to come to you first. You see, budget is always an account of where money will spend what. And like a typical household budget, this is also prioritization, that X amount will go here, X plus 1 here, X minus 2 here. This time around, we saw that the defense budget is up 15.19% year on year. It amounts to 14.67% of the total union expenditure. This is in the backdrop of Operation Sindoor. I get it. Defense is a priority. But given the national health emergency that pollution has become, for its budget to be reduced, does it talk about misplaced priorities? I would want you to answer this question purely from the point of view of budget and budgetary allocation. What does
No,
this say?
absolutely. Absolutely, Sanket. I mean, today you can see I'm outdoors. I'm actually at a college, where we are doing a discussion on the budget. And I can see that children are exercising in Delhi NCR. They're doing their national cadet training in this pollution. And I've been speaking to so many of them who are talking about the fact that they are all using nebulizers. They're all using, sprays, etc., on an everyday basis, and steroids. And I myself have gone through a course of steroids to deal with the air pollution in Delhi. So this just shows you exactly what your guest was just saying, that at the end of the day, this is not being treated as a national emergency, a national health emergency, because people are learning to live with, poor quality air, the way they live with poor quality water, and the way they live with poor roads and other urban infrastructure, because we simply have accepted that our cities will not have good air quality. And I just want to mention, in the last year, I've had about 100 plus flights and visited over 30 cities in India, and every city has an air pollution problem. It might be, that the AQI is 100 somewhere, it's 250 somewhere, it's 300 somewhere. And in Delhi, of course, we are not allowed to measure it because, we sprinkle water on the air quality monitors. And that's where the budget goes, by the way. When they want to show that they're actually spending on air quality management, it's on the guns that spray water on the at the roads to reduce the dust. I mean, very honestly, these are very rudimentary solutions. We have some of the best minds in this country. We have people who have come out with pollution action plans, who have come out with green action plans, which all state governments and national government are aware of. And I really thought that this time, if we look at renewable energy as a very long term solution for this country, it's not only from the pollution point of view, Sanket, from a budgetary point of view, and also from an economic security point of view. If you invest in solar, you reduce your dependence on American oil, that is Venezuelan oil, and you reduce your dependence on Russian oil, and you reduce your dependence on Iranian oil. So isn't it a no-brainer to invest more in solar energy, in wind energy, because this produces a long-term solution. And states like Haryana, Punjab, UP, Delhi, they all can work on solar power. It's just that we haven't incentivized it enough, and we haven't made it easily accessible enough. And of course, we haven't invested in a production linked incentive scheme for solar, because we then will say, if we say, okay, let's invest more in solar, then we are increasing our dependence on China because they are dominating that supply chain. But then we should be investing in that supply chain. So very honestly, I think we have to look at it as a not just a public health emergency, but as a way for India's economic security.
Yeah, Mitali, do you feel that this sort of allocation where you see, if you just look at pollution control budget, obviously it has gone down. But when you juxtapose it with all the other spends, the
Yeah.
question that you heard me ask Mr. Singhvi, do you feel
No,
even that is enough?
no,
It's just
absolutely,
about
Sanket. I
priority.
mean, it's just not, it's evident. I mean, if you think about it, most of the ministries have got an increase, even if it is just a 4 or 5% increase. Every year we are tracking the budget, we can see that most ministries get an increase in their budget. The one time when a ministry gets a reduction in its budget, and I've seen this with every ministry, is when the ministry is unable to utilize its budget. Now, if we had a national clean air action plan, and that national clean air action plan had, some amount of allocation, say per city 3,000 crores. Let's do it in 10 cities. We still need 30,000 crores for such a mission. And that would be a very credible investment in India's economy because it will give you returns in terms of increased labor productivity. It would give you returns in terms of catalyzing new MSMEs and startups in the space of the circular economy. It would create green jobs. It would create green manufacturing. This entire scenario is such that there is no economic justification for not having an investment in this space.
Vimlendu, what does one do from a situation like this? And I again draw your attention to the number of people according to the Lancet report in 2022 PM 2.5 killed, 17 lakh 18,000. This is a 38% rise in pollution deaths compared to 2010. Pollution deaths have far exceeded those from COVID-19, and might I say, however seditious it may sound, this is way more than any war has killed. So while I understand a priority to modernize and upgrade India's defense forces and give a big modernization push to our defense, this is also something, pollution is also something that requires, this is also a war. We are at war. Where
Absolutely,
is the
Sanket.
action at war footing?
Absolutely. So we don't see that proportionate action. That's one. The other is that when you say that, what can we do? I'm a strong proponent of the maxim that we cannot actually have private solution to a public problem. At the end of the day, it has to be the government alone. And it cannot be the citizenry in our little planting on of 5 trees there or converting into an EV and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it needs surgery, it needs large scale systemic long term investment. It needs a country-wide plan to really move from point A to point B when A is deadly and B perhaps in the near term could be perhaps lesser deadly in terms of an improvement that we can make, so that eventually we may move to a scenario where we do not have these numbers of 18% deaths because of air pollution. And by the way, imagine if we actually broaden this conversation and add water pollution and other forms of pollution. Imagine, I am very sure that more than 40% of India actually dies because of bad environment maintained by the government, because at the end of the day, it's the state that is the custodian of the environment. In fact, if you look at the cases going on in the Supreme Court and in our constitutional courts of high courts as well, that majority of the violation of environment cases are against the government because the government is the largest violator. So we're talking about two things. We're talking about government that is the custodian, should be taking care of our environment, is not doing enough, is completely, as Mitali also said, sprinkling water, and I've documented it several times in terms of not giving us the real number to begin with in terms of our pollution levels in our rivers or in our air. And the other is not doing enough inaction, and action of a kind which is actually counterproductive to environment. So inaction plus action both together is actually making our entire environmental being, our existence, in jeopardy in terms of a high risk that we're talking about. And then all of this, by the way, this is not a political propaganda that we're talking about. This has been going on. It's not, it's not 2026 affair that government did not have enough time after Gita Gopinath flagged this. The government has been put in the spot many times, and they all are aware of this. And despite that, if we are not able to carve out even 1 lakh crore for air pollution, for the entire city, for the entire country, what are we even doing? As the 1,000 crores for entire pollution challenge when the 40% deaths in our
You see,
country.
I think for the government, it's sad that they're considering pollution as a Delhi issue, Delhi NCR problem. So even if you do that, an allocation of 1,091 crores, I don't know. First of all, you have to have an action plan, and buying sprinklers cannot be an action plan.
Absolutely, not even
But
scientifically.
pollution, Vimlendu, is a national problem. It is not a Delhi NCR problem.
Absolutely. So that's the other thing that I keep talking about, that at the end of the day, one, it is not a winter month problem. That's the biggest disservice that we do. We think that the pollution only exists between October to January. It's a perennial problem. It's a 12-month problem. Only thing is that pollution gets visible in the month of October, November, December, and therefore we talk about it. One. Two is that the other disservice that we do to it is that we think that it is only the capital's problem or Delhi NCR's problem or at most Indo-Gangetic problem. If you look at the numbers, if you look at the 10 cities, that the most polluted cities of our country, there are many cities that are more polluted than Delhi. So on an average, almost 70% of India's air through the year is actually poor, very poor, severe or hazardous. And therefore, it has to have a plan. In fact, if you look at National Clean Air Program, the earlier allocation of resource in 2019, it was actually about 120 cities. The other thing is that India doesn't even know how polluted our air is, because 60% of India's land mass is beyond the measurement regime that we're talking about. So it's only few areas. Rural India, so we don't even measure anything. In many places, we're not even, forget about a compromised monitor. We talk, and a yardstick of 500 pay top up ho jata hai. We talk about no monitor, no presence. Delhi is perhaps the only place that actually has 39 air quality monitors for perhaps 29 million people who live here in that sense. Versus Gurgaon has 3. Most of them are shut all the time. If you look at I'm very sure Bhagalpur or other places, I don't know if your Faizabad has an air quality monitoring station in that sense. So it's not there. That for us, we'll be able to solve it. The first thing is to measure it. Unless and until you have a diagnosis of whether you have you have fever, then you go into
I think
the
that's a
source
very
of your
important
fever.
solution that you're providing, that spend the money in investing in pollution monitoring equipment. Let's
Very,
start
very
with
sure.
that first.
To begin with, so that
To
we
begin
know
with.
how bad is the problem. And then we look at the source, like what the Supreme Court asked CAQM, that in 10 years that, we have had these boards and bodies, why can't you even tell us, and IIT Kanpur and IIT Kharagpur, all of them have done studies, why can't you tell us that who pollutes? Is it the farmers? Is it the vehicles? Is it the thermal power plants? Because the government again said, oh, well, we want to do yet another study, and was reprimanded by the Supreme Court. And then next hearing, CAQM went and said, oh, well, yes, 40% of pollution actually is from the mobility sector. So when we know the cities that are polluted, at least some of them, when we know the sources of pollution, when we also have the solution with us, because at the end of the day, if you do not do that, if you reverse some of these processes, there are some low-hanging solutions. As I said, why should thermal power plants be emitting sulfur dioxide when we are signatory to several of these treaties globally, where we are not, our thermal power plants are not supposed to, one, of course, thermal power plants should go away eventually, but of course, in terms of our energy requirement right now, it is going to take perhaps 20, 30 years more to really
Right.
become completely net zero in that sense. So unless and until we go on that track of solving the crisis, we have to solve pollution and not perception. The only thing that the government does is perception. That PM10 that it keeps hitting through that sprinkling of water on the road. As in, by the way, as I told you, almost 80% of the money is not spent. From the money that is spent, 80% of that is actually spent on these voodoo signs, sprinkling of water trucks. In fact, I saw a truck sprinkling water in Delhi last week when it was raining. So imagine while it was raining, there was water sprinkling that was going on, because उनको इतने kilometers शायद चलने होते हैं, तब उनको पैसे मिलते होंगे.
Added safety. Vimlendu, it is for your and my lungs. Added safety mechanism.
And we don't know what are they sprinkling. Where is the water coming from? Hope not that toxic water from Yamuna, because every time it
Yamuna,
passes
yeah.
through, if I'm
which will be
backwater.
another crisis. But thank you very much, Vimlendu, for joining us. Mitali Nikore also for joining us. This is an important issue, and we will continue highlighting it. The point is, we understand that priorities change. So right now, the government's priority seems to boost defense expenditure. But for something which kills 17 lakh plus Indians every year, is 1091 crores enough? That is the question we all have to ask. Thank you very much, Vimlendu, for joining us. Thank you, viewer, for joining us as well.